Simone Carter sat in the sterile waiting room of the Chicago Medical Center, flipping through a magazine without reading a single word. Her leg bounced with nervous energy, a habit she'd never been able to break when she was anxious. It was just a routine appointment. Just some blood work her insurance company required for her new policy. Nothing to be nervous about. Except that Simone hated needles, hated hospitals, hated the antiseptic smell that brought back memories of her mother's long illness 3 years ago. Simone Carter? A nurse with kind eyes and graying hair appeared in the doorway. "We're ready for you." Simone followed her down a hallway lined with examination rooms, her sneakers squeaking slightly on the polished linoleum floor. She was dressed for comfort in jeans and a soft green sweater that brought out the warm tones in her dark brown skin. Her natural hair was pulled back in a simple bun, and she wore minimal makeup, just enough to look professional for her job as a high school English teacher. "Dr. Vitale will be with you in just a moment," the nurse said, gesturing to an examination room. "Have a seat and try to relax. I know you mentioned you're nervous about needles. That obvious?" Simone tried to smile. "Honey, I've been doing this for 30 years. I can spot needle anxiety from across the room." The nurse patted her shoulder. "Dr. Vitale is excellent. You're in good hands." After the nurse left, Simone sat on the crinkly paper-covered examination table and tried to calm her racing heart. She was being ridiculous. It was just a blood draw. People did this every day. She taught teenagers who were braver about medical procedures than she was. The door opened, and Simone looked up, expecting to see the nurse again. Instead, a man walked in who made her breath catch in her throat. Dr. Vitale was easily 6 feet 3 inches tall, with the kind of build that suggested he spent significant time in a gym. His white coat was immaculately pressed over what looked like an expensive charcoal suit. Dark hair was swept back from a face that could have graced magazine covers, sharp cheekbones, strong jaw, and eyes that were such a pale gray they were almost silver. But it wasn't his looks that made Simone's pulse quicken. It was the way he moved with a predator's grace, a coiled energy that suggested danger despite the professional setting. This man looked like he belonged in a boardroom or a boxing ring, not a medical clinic. "Miss Carter," he said, his voice carrying a faint Italian accent that sent shivers down her spine. "I'm Dr. Marco Vitale. I understand you're here for routine blood work?" "Yes," Simone managed, trying to get her brain to function normally. "Insurance requirements for a new policy." Marco moved to wash his hands at the small sink, and Simone noticed how his movements were economical, precise. Everything about him suggested control, discipline, power barely contained beneath a civilized surface. "I see from your chart that you have a history of anxiety around needles," Marco said, turning back to her with a small smile. "I promise to make this as quick and painless as possible." "I know I'm being silly," Simone said, embarrassed. "I'm a grown woman. I should be able to handle a blood draw." "Fear isn't silly, Miss Carter. It's human." Marco pulled on gloves and began preparing the supplies. "Tell me, what do you do for work?" "I teach English at Roosevelt High School, 10th and 11th grade. "A teacher." Something in his expression softened. "That's admirable work. What do you teach? Literature? Writing?" "Both. Right now we're reading The Great Gatsby with the juniors. Most of them hate it at first, but by the end, they're arguing about whether Gatsby was a romantic or a fool." "And what do you think?" Marco asked, sitting on a rolling stool and positioning himself in front of her. "I think he was both. That you can be hopelessly romantic and tragically foolish at the same time." Simone was surprised to find herself relaxing, distracted by the conversation. "Perhaps that's true of most great loves," Marco said quietly. He took her arm gently, his touch surprisingly warm through the gloves. "I'm going to tie this tourniquet now. You'll feel some pressure, but not pain. Look at me, not at your arm." Simone met his pale gray eyes, and something passed between them, a spark of awareness, of connection, that had nothing to do with the medical procedure, and everything to do with the man holding her arm like it was something precious. "Tell me more about your students," Marco said, his voice low and soothing. "What do you love about teaching?" "The moments when something clicks," Simone found herself saying. "When a kid who's struggled all year suddenly understands a concept or falls in love with a book, those moments make all the frustration worth it. You're passionate about your work." It wasn't a question. Marco's eyes never left hers. "That's rare. Most people just go through the motions." "Life's too short for motions," Simone replied. "If you're going to do something, do it with your whole heart, or don't do it at all." Something flickered across Marco's expression, surprise, approval. something darker and more intense that made Simone's breath catch. "All done," he said quietly. Simone looked down to find a small bandage on her inner elbow. She hadn't felt a thing. "How did you—" "I didn't even feel the needle. Distraction is the best medicine," Marco said with a slight smile. He labeled the vials of blood with practiced efficiency. "Your results should be ready in 48 hours. We'll call you with the findings." "That's it?" Simone felt oddly disappointed that the appointment was over, that she had no reason to stay in this room with this fascinating, dangerous-looking doctor who'd somehow made her feel completely safe. "That's it." Marco stood, and Simone was reminded again of his considerable height. "Unless you have any other concerns?" She should say no, should thank him and leave, and forget about the way his eyes seemed to see straight through her carefully constructed armor. Instead, she heard herself ask, "Have you been practicing medicine long? Long enough to know that sometimes the best treatment has nothing to do with medicine?" Marco's smile was enigmatic. "Take care of yourself, Miss Carter, and try not to worry about the results. I'm sure everything will be fine." Simone left the clinic in a daze, Marco Vitale's pale gray eyes haunting her thoughts. There was something about him that didn't quite fit. Something that made her teacher's instincts honed by years of spotting troubled students and hidden problems ping with quiet alarm. But she pushed the thoughts aside. He was just her doctor. She'd probably never see him again. She had no idea how wrong she was. 48 hours later, Simone was in her classroom after school, grading papers and trying not to think about Marco Vitale. She'd been remarkably unsuccessful at forgetting him. Those eyes kept appearing in her thoughts at inappropriate moments during staff meetings, while teaching, in the shower. It was absurd. She didn't even know the man. He'd drawn her blood and been professionally friendly. That was all. Her phone rang, and she answered absently, still focused on a student's poorly argued essay about symbolism in Gatsby. "Miss Carter? This is Dr. Vitale from Chicago Medical Center." Simone's pen froze mid-correction. Just the sound of his voice sent heat racing through her veins. "Dr. Vitale. Hello." She tried to sound professional, not like her heart was suddenly pounding. "You have my test results?" There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Marco spoke again, his voice was carefully neutral. "Yes, I do. Miss Carter, I need you to come back to the clinic. Today, if possible. There's something we need to discuss in person." Simone's stomach dropped. "Is something wrong? Is it serious?" Another pause. "It's not a conversation for the phone. Can you come in within the next hour?" Yes. Yes, I can come now." Fear eclipsed everything else. People didn't ask you to come in unless the news was bad. Cancer. That's what she was thinking. Her mother had died of ovarian cancer. Maybe it ran in families. Maybe Miss Carter. "Simone." Marco's voice gentled. "Please don't panic. I just need to speak with you in person about the results. Can you drive safely?" "Yes. I'm fine. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I'll be waiting." The line went dead, and Simone sat staring at her phone, her hands trembling. Around her, the classroom suddenly felt too small, the walls closing in. Whatever was in those test results, it was serious enough that Dr. Vitale wouldn't discuss it over the phone. She grabbed her bag and jacket, barely remembering to lock her classroom door before rushing to her car. The drive, too. The clinic passed in a blur of worst-case scenarios and half-remembered statistics about cancer survival rates. When she arrived, the nurse who'd greeted her last time was waiting at the front desk. "Miss Carter, Dr. Vitale is expecting you. Come with me." They bypassed the waiting room, moving quickly down the hallway to the same examination room where Simone had sat 2 days ago. Marco was already there, standing by the window, his posture tense in a way it hadn't been during her first visit. "Thank you, Margaret," he said to the nurse. "Please make sure we're not disturbed." The nurse nodded and closed the door, leaving them alone. Marco turned to face Simone, and she saw something in his expression that made her heart sink. This was bad. This was very bad. "Sit down," he said quietly. "Just tell me." Simone stayed standing, her hands clenched at her sides. "Whatever it is, just say it. Is it cancer? Am I dying?" "You're not dying." Marco moved closer, his pale eyes intense. "But your blood work showed something unexpected, something that's going to change everything." "What?" Simone's voice was barely a whisper. Marco held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said, very clearly, "You're pregnant." The world tilted. Simone's knees buckled, and Marco caught her, his hands strong and steady on her arms as he guided her to a chair. "That's not possible," she said. her voice sounding distant to her own ears. That's not I can't be pregnant. The blood test is very clear. You're approximately 6 weeks along. No. Simone shook her head violently. No. That's wrong. Your lab made a mistake. I can't be. She stopped, her mind racing through the calendar. 6 weeks ago, she'd been dating Marcus. They'd been together for 4 months before she'd discovered he was married and ended things immediately. But they'd been careful. They'd used protection every single time, except for that one night. That one stupid, impulsive night when they'd both had too much wine and oh God, Simone whispered, her hands covering her face. Oh God, this can't be happening. Marco crouched in front of her chair, his hands gently pulling hers away from her face so he could see her eyes. Simone, look at me. Breathe. You're going to be okay. Okay? How am I going to be okay? I'm pregnant with my ex-boyfriend's baby. My married ex-boyfriend's baby. I'm a teacher. I have a reputation to maintain. This is going to ruin everything. Nothing is ruined, Marco said firmly. This is unexpected. Yes, but it's not a catastrophe. We'll figure this out. We? Simone laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. You're my doctor. This isn't your problem. You're my patient. That makes it my concern. Marco stood, moving to the sink to get her a cup of water. Drink this. Then we need to talk about your options and your next steps. Simone took the water with shaking hands. Her mind was spinning, trying to process information that didn't seem real. Pregnant. She was pregnant. With Marcus's baby. Marcus, who was married, who'd lied to her for 4 months, who'd probably laugh in her face if she told him. I don't know what to do, she whispered. First, you need to schedule a follow-up appointment with an OB/GYN. I can refer you to someone excellent. Marco pulled out a prescription pad and began writing. You'll need prenatal vitamins. You'll need to avoid alcohol, obviously, and certain foods. Do you have someone you can talk to? Family? Friends? My grandmother in Atlanta. But I can't. I can't tell her this. It'll break her heart. You don't have to tell anyone until you're ready. Marco handed her the prescriptions. Take a few days. Process this. Then decide what you want to do. Simone looked up at him. This stranger who'd just delivered news that shattered her carefully planned life. Why are you being so kind? Most doctors would just hand me a pamphlet and send me on my way. Something shifted in Marco's expression. Because I believe that people in crisis deserve compassion, not judgment. And because, he hesitated, then continued, because you seem like someone who deserves better than this situation. Their eyes met, and Simone felt that spark again, that dangerous connection that had nothing to do with doctor and patient, and everything to do with something deeper, more primal. Thank you, she said quietly. You're welcome. Marco stepped back, professional distance reasserting itself. Call, if you need anything. My direct number is on the prescription. Simone left the clinic in a fog, clutching the prescriptions like a lifeline. She sat in her car for 20 minutes, staring at nothing, trying to accept a reality that felt like a nightmare. She was pregnant, alone, frightened, and somehow, the only person who'd offered her any comfort was a doctor with pale gray eyes and a presence that suggested he was far more dangerous than any medical professional should be. What Simone didn't know, what she couldn't possibly know, was that Marco Vitali had lied. She wasn't pregnant. The blood test had shown nothing abnormal at all. Marco stood in his private office after Simone left, staring at her actual test results and feeling the weight of his deception settle on his shoulders like physical pain. He'd lied to her, told her she was carrying a child that didn't exist. Deliberately, consciously altered her life with a falsehood that would have consequences he couldn't fully predict. And he'd do it again in a heartbeat, because the alternative was watching her die. Marco's phone buzzed. He answered it immediately. Talk to me. She just left the clinic. His head of security, Antonio, reported. She's sitting in her car. Looks upset but not panicked. Good. Stay on her. I want 24/7 surveillance until we resolve this situation. Boss, are you sure about this? Lying to a civilian about a pregnancy that's risky. What if she finds out? Then I'll deal with the consequences. Marco's voice was hard. What I won't do is let Konstantin Volkov murder an innocent woman because she happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. 3 weeks ago, Marco had received intelligence that changed everything. Konstantin Volkov, a Russian arms dealer with a taste for violence and a grudge against Marco's organization, had put a hit out on a woman named Simone Carter. The reason? Simone had witnessed a meeting between Volkov and a corrupt city official in a coffee shop where she'd been grading papers. She hadn't realized what she was seeing, hadn't paid attention to the conversation happening 2 tables over. But Volkov's paranoia was legendary. He'd decided she was a potential witness who needed to be eliminated. Marco had spent 3 weeks trying to find Volkov, trying to neutralize the threat through his usual channels. But Volkov had gone to ground, and his assassin was still active, still hunting. When Simone walked into Marco's clinic, one of several legitimate medical facilities he used as cover for his actual work. Running Chicago's most powerful crime family, he'd recognized her immediately from the surveillance photos his people had compiled. And he'd made a split-second decision that went against every rule he'd ever followed. He'd decided to protect her, not through violence or intimidation, but through deception. A pregnant woman would be valuable to keep alive. Pregnant women were monitored by doctors, by family, by society. If Volkov's assassin thought Simone was carrying a child, he might hesitate. He might wait for a better opportunity that Marco could use to trap him. It was a gamble. A dangerous, potentially disastrous gamble. But it was the only play Marco could make that didn't involve locking Simone up in a safe house and explaining that her life was in danger from a Russian arms dealer she'd never heard of. The assassin? Marco asked Antonio. Still in Chicago. We're tracking him, but he's good. Haven't been able to get close enough to take him out without collateral damage. Then we wait, keep her safe, and pray this works. Marco hung up and looked at Simone's file again. 28 years old. High school teacher. No family except an elderly grandmother. Recently ended a relationship with a married man named Marcus Reynolds, who was, Marco's research revealed, a complete ass who didn't deserve someone like Simone. She was innocent in all of this. A bystander who'd done nothing wrong except exist in the wrong place at the wrong moment. And now Marco had tangled her life up with lies and deception and dangers she couldn't even imagine. All to keep her alive. He told himself it was purely strategic, that he'd have done the same for any potential victim, that his concern for Simone Carter was professional, detached, appropriate. But he'd been lying to himself for 3 days now, ever since she'd walked into his examination room and looked at him with eyes that seemed to see past his carefully constructed facades. The truth was simpler and far more dangerous. Marco Vitali, Chicago's most feared mafia boss, was developing feelings for the woman he was lying to, the woman he'd sworn to protect, the woman who could never, ever know the truth about who and what he really was. Over the next 2 weeks, Marco watched Simone Carter with an intensity that had nothing to do with security and everything to do with obsession. His men reported her movements with military precision, where she went, who she talked to, how she spent her days. She went to work, went home, went to the grocery store. She was quiet, contained, processing the news he'd given her alone. The surveillance footage showed a woman moving through her days with a careful deliberateness that broke Marco's heart. She'd sit at her kitchen table with prenatal vitamins in front of her, staring at the bottle for long minutes before taking one. She'd stand in front of her mirror, hand pressed to her still flat stomach, expression unreadable. She'd grade papers late into the night, as if work could distract her from the life-changing situation she believed she was facing. She hadn't told anyone, hadn't called family or friends, hadn't contacted Marcus Reynolds, the man she believed had fathered her non-existent child. She was handling it alone, with a strength that made Marco's chest ache with something he refused to name. "Boss, this is getting complicated," Antonio said one evening as they reviewed the day's surveillance. "She's too isolated. If something happens, if the assassin gets through—" "He won't get through," Marco interrupted, his voice hard. "I want 2 men on her at all times. One visible, one not. If anyone gets within 50 feet of her without authorization, I want to know about it immediately." Antonio studied his boss's face, seeing something he'd never seen before in all their years of working. Together, genuine fear. "You're falling for her," Antonio said quietly. "This isn't just about protection anymore." Marco didn't deny it. "She's extraordinary, Antonio, strong and vulnerable at the same time. She's facing what she thinks is an impossible situation with grace and courage. And it's my fault, my lie, my deception. How am I supposed to not feel something for her? You could tell her the truth. End this before it gets more complicated. And put her in danger? Volkov's assassin is still out there. Still hunting. The pregnancy story is the only thing buying us time to find him." Marco's hands clenched into fists. "I know it's wrong. I know I'm playing with her life, her emotions. But I'm keeping her alive. That has to count for something." What Marco didn't say, What he couldn't admit even to his most trusted lieutenant was that watching Simone had become the highlight of his days. He'd find excuses to drive past her school, to be in the area when she was grocery shopping, to see her even from a distance. He'd memorized her routines. She took her coffee black with 1 sugar. She always bought fresh flowers on Sundays, bright sunflowers that she'd arrange in a cheap vase in her kitchen. She walked with purpose, her natural hair bouncing with each step, her presence drawing eyes even when she wasn't trying to be noticed. Marco found himself wanting things he'd never wanted before, wanting to be the one bringing her coffee in the morning, wanting to buy her better than the cheap bouquet she could afford on a teacher's salary, wanting to be more than the lie that stood between them. It was pathetic. He was Chicago's most feared mafia boss, reduced to mooning over surveillance footage of a woman who didn't even know the truth about who he was or why he'd entered her life. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening. Marco was in his office at La Familia when Antonio called with an urgent update. "We have a problem." Marcus Reynolds just showed up at her apartment. Marco's blood went cold. "What?" "The ex-boyfriend, the married one. He's at her door right now. Our external camera caught him arriving about 5 minutes ago." Marco was already moving, grabbing his jacket, his keys. "I'm 10 minutes out. Do not let him hurt her. Do not let him leave until I get there." "Boss, maybe you should let this play out. Let her handle her personal business." "Now, Antonio, that's an order." The drive to Simone's apartment building took 8 minutes because Marco ignored every traffic law on the books. He arrived to find Antonio stationed in the hallway outside Simone's door, where raised voices could be heard through the thin walls. "How long has he been in there?" Marco demanded. 7 minutes. It started civil, but it's escalating. "You want us to intervene?" Marco's jaw clenched. Every instinct screamed at him to kick down the door and remove Marcus Reynolds from Simone's presence permanently. But he couldn't. Not without revealing the surveillance, the protection, the lie that had entangled their lives. "No. But if he touches her, if he threatens her, you go in. Understood?" Through the door, Marco could hear Simone's voice, strong despite the emotion underlying it. "You need to leave, Marcus. We have nothing to discuss." "Nothing to discuss?" "Simone, you're pregnant with my child. You think I don't have a right to know about this? How did you... Who told you?" Simone's voice was sharp with surprise. "Your neighbor saw you at the clinic. Word got around. And here I thought you were different. Thought you weren't the type to try and trap a man with a pregnancy." The sound of flesh striking flesh made Marco see red. He had the door open before Antonio could stop him, moving into Simone's small apartment with lethal purpose. Marcus Reynolds was standing over Simone, his hand raised for another blow, her cheek already reddening from the first. The scene froze as both of them registered. Marco's presence. "Who the hell are you?" Marcus demanded. "I'm the man who's going to break every bone in your hand if you don't remove it from hitting distance of her face." Marco's voice was deadly calm, but his eyes promised violence. "You have 3 seconds to leave. 1, 2. Marcus apparently had some survival instincts. He grabbed his jacket and fled, but not before shooting Simone a look of pure venom. "This isn't over," he hissed at her. "Yes," Marco said quietly, stepping between them. "It is." After Marcus left, Marco turned to find Simone staring at him with wide eyes, her hand pressed to her reddened cheek. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice shaking. "How did you know?" "I was in the neighborhood," Marco lied smoothly, hating himself for adding another deception to the pile. "I saw your ex arriving and thought I should check on you." "I'm glad I did. You can't just break into people's apartments. The door was unlocked, and he hit you. Simone. He hit you." Marco's voice was rough, with barely controlled rage. "Let me see." He moved closer, his fingers gentle as he tilted her face to examine the mark Marcus had left. His touch was clinical, professional, but Simone's breath hitched at the contact, and Marco felt heat race through his veins. "It's not bad," he said, his voice lowering, "but it'll bruise." "Do you have ice?" "In the freezer." Simone's voice was barely above a whisper. "Marco, how did you really know to come here?" Marco met her eyes and made a decision. "Not the truth, not yet, but something closer to it. Because I've been worried about you. Because I know you're alone in dealing with this situation. Because I couldn't stop thinking about you sitting in that examination room, brave and scared and facing an impossible situation alone." He cupped her uninjured cheek. "Because I care, Simone, more than I should. More than is professional or appropriate." "We barely know each other," Simone whispered, but she wasn't pulling away from his touch. I know enough. I know you're strong enough to face Marcus down even when you're terrified. I know you haven't told anyone about the pregnancy because you're trying to protect the people you love from the fallout. I know you deserve better than what you've been given. This is crazy, Simone said, but her hand came up to cover his where it rested against her cheek. You're my doctor. I'm supposedly pregnant with another man's child. This can't happen. I know all the reasons why this is impossible, Marco said. But I also know that what I feel when I look at you is the most real thing I've experienced in years. So tell me to leave, Simone. Tell me you don't feel this too, and I'll walk away. But if you feel even a fraction of what I feel, then we owe it to ourselves to see where this goes. Simone stared at him, emotions warring across her beautiful face. Marco could see the moment she made her decision, saw the walls crumble, saw her choose to leap into the unknown. Don't leave, she whispered. Please don't leave. Marco exhaled shakily and pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was something precious and fragile. Simone melted into him, her face pressed against his chest, and Marco felt something fundamental shift in his world. This was what he'd been protecting. This moment, this woman, this impossible connection that had formed between them despite every obstacle. And if keeping her safe meant lying for a little while longer, then Marco would bear that burden. Because the alternative, losing her to Volkov's assassin or to the truth that would destroy any chance they had, was unthinkable. I've got you, he murmured into her hair. You're safe now. I promise you're safe. If only she knew how literal that promise was. If only she knew the lengths he'd already gone to keep her alive. He told himself he was just monitoring the situation, making sure the lie was holding, making sure she was safe from Volkov's assassin, who was still somewhere in Chicago, still hunting. But the truth was that Marco couldn't stop thinking about her, about the way she'd looked at him in that examination room, about her passion for teaching, her courage in facing what she thought was a life-changing situation, her vulnerability when she'd said she didn't know what to do. He wanted to call her, wanted to check on her, offer support, be something more than the doctor who'd delivered devastating news. But he couldn't. Any contact would be suspicious, inappropriate, dangerous for them both. So he watched from a distance and tried to ignore the growing conviction that Simone Carter was becoming more than just another person he was protecting. She was becoming an obsession. The call came on a Thursday evening. Marco was in his office at the restaurant that served as his public front, La Famiglia, an upscale Italian establishment in the Gold Coast where Chicago's elite gathered and where Marco conducted business that had nothing to do with food. Boss, we have a problem. Antonio's voice was tense. The assassin made a move. Marco's blood went cold. When? Where? 20 minutes ago. He followed her to her apartment. We intercepted him in the parking garage before he could get to her floor. He's contained, but boss, it was close. Too close. Is she safe? She's in her apartment. Doesn't even know anything happened. But we need to move. Need to make this threat permanent, gone. Or she's going to keep being a target. Marco was already moving, grabbing his jacket, his mind racing through scenarios. Where is he now? The warehouse on South Racine. Waiting for your instructions. I'll be there in 20 minutes. And Antonio? Make sure every man we have is watching her apartment. If one more person gets close to her, heads are going to roll. The warehouse was one of several properties Marco owned for situations exactly like this. Neutral territory. Soundproofed. Far from prying eyes. The assassin was tied to a chair in the center of the space, blood dripping from a split lip where Antonio's men had persuaded him to stop struggling. He looked up when Marco entered, and recognition flickered across his face. Marco, Vitale, the assassin said in heavily accented English. Volkov said you might get involved. Said you have a weakness for playing hero. Where is Volkov? Marco's voice was ice. You think I'll tell you? You think I'll betray my employer? Marco moved closer, his presence radiating the kind of danger that made even hardened criminals reconsider their life choices. I think you'll tell me everything I want to know, because the alternative is so much worse than anything you're imagining. It took 2 hours. 2 hours of careful, methodical questioning, 2 hours of breaking down the assassin's resistance, until he finally gave up the information Marco needed. Volkov was in a safe house on the north side. He was planning to leave Chicago in 48 hours, heading back to Russia until the heat died down. And yes, Simone Carter was still on his list, still marked for elimination because of a conversation she didn't even remember witnessing. Why? Marco asked, his voice deadly quiet. Why does she have to die? She's nobody. She's not involved in our world. She can't hurt you. Volkov doesn't take chances. Never has. Anyone who sees anything, anyone who might talk, they're eliminated. That's how he stayed alive this long. Marco looked at the assassin, at this man who'd been prepared to murder an innocent woman for the crime of sitting in a coffee shop, and felt rage burn through his veins like acid. Here's what's going to happen, Marco said quietly. You're going to disappear. Completely. Natural causes complications from a pregnancy nobody knew about. You tried to verify it, but the hospital records confirmed it. She's no longer a threat because she's no longer alive. The assassin's eyes widened. You want me to lie to Volkov? I want you to deliver a message that will end his interest in an innocent woman. And in exchange, I'll let you live. I'll give you money to disappear, to start over somewhere far from Chicago. But if I ever hear that you've come near Simone Carter again, if I ever hear that you've told Volkov the truth, I will find you. Marco leaned down until they were eye to eye. And I will make you wish you'd never been born. It was a calculated risk. Trusting an assassin to deliver a false message, to sell a story convincingly enough that a paranoid arms dealer would believe it. But it was better than the alternative, better than starting a war with Volkov that would put more innocent people in danger. The assassin nodded slowly. Okay. I'll do it. But Vitaly, you're making a mistake. Getting attached to that girl. Weakness like that will get you killed. Quietly. But some things are worth dying for. Marco called Simone the next day, using his doctor voice, his professional demeanor firmly in place. Miss Carter, this is Dr. Vitale. I wanted to schedule a follow-up appointment to check on how you're doing. Is that really necessary? Simone's voice sounded tired. I mean, I'm fine. I'm taking the vitamins. I have an appointment with an OB/GYN next week. I'd still like to see you. Just to make sure everything is progressing normally. No charge for the visit. Consider it my way of ensuring I didn't miss anything in the initial blood work. There was a pause. Then Simone said quietly, Okay. When? This afternoon. I have a 3:00 opening. I'll be there. When Simone arrived, Marco could see the toll the past 2 weeks had taken. There were shadows under her eyes, a tightness around her mouth that suggested stress and sleepless nights. She'd lost weight, her face more angular than it had been at their first meeting. It made something in Marco's chest constrict painfully. How are you feeling? He asked, once they were alone in the examination room. Honestly, like my life is falling apart. Simone laughed, but there was no humor in it. I can't eat, can't sleep, keep running through scenarios of how to tell people what to do, how to handle this. Have you talked to the father? No. Simone's jaw tightened. And I'm not going to. Marcus made his choices. I'm not going to complicate his life any more than I already did. That's generous of you. It's not generous. It's self-preservation. Marcus is married, Dr. Vitale. He has a wife and a life that doesn't include me. Telling him about this, she gestured vaguely at her stomach, would only create drama that nobody needs. Marco studied her face, seeing the pain beneath the practical words. She'd been hurt by this, Marcus. Badly. And now she was facing what she thought was the consequence of that relationship alone. The guilt nearly choked him. Simone, he said quietly, I need to tell you something. She looked up, and Marco saw the fear flash across her face, the instant assumption that he was about to deliver more bad news. Is something wrong with the baby? No, nothing like that. Marco moved closer, fighting the urge to touch her, to offer comfort through physical contact. I just wanted to say that you don't have to face this alone. If you need support, if you need someone to talk to, I'm here. You're my doctor. That's not really appropriate. I'm a person who cares about your well-being. That's entirely appropriate. Their eyes met, and something passed between them, that same spark from their first meeting, but stronger now, charged with everything that had happened since. Why do you care? Simone whispered. You don't even know me. I know enough. Marco's hand moved before he could stop it, reaching out to tuck a stray curl behind her ear. The moment his fingers brushed her skin, electricity shot through him. I know you're strong. I know you're facing an impossible situation with grace and courage. I know you deserve better than what you've been given. Dr. Vitale. Marco. Please, call me Marco. Marco. The way she said his name made his chest tighten. This is complicated. I'm your patient. I'm supposedly pregnant. We can't, whatever this is, we can't. I know. But he didn't move away. Neither did she. They stood frozen, inches apart, the air between them charged with want and impossibility. Simone. His phone buzzed urgently in his pocket. Antonio. Marco swore under his breath and stepped back, the moment shattering. I'm sorry. I have to take this. He stepped into the hallway. His jaw clenched with frustration. This better be important. Volkov bought it, Antonio said without preamble. The assassin delivered the story. Volkov's intelligence confirmed that Simone Carter was pregnant and that there were complications. He's pulling out of Chicago tonight. The threat is over, boss. Relief and dread washed through Marco in equal measure. The threat was over. Simone was safe, which meant the lie he'd told the pregnancy that didn't exist no longer served a purpose, which meant he had to tell her the truth and lose any chance he might have had with her in the process. Marco walked back into the examination room, his expression grave. Simone looked up immediately, reading his face with the same perception she probably used on her students. What's wrong? We need to talk. Marco closed the door and locked it, needing privacy for what he was about to confess. Simone, I haven't been entirely honest with you. Her face went pale. Is it the baby? Is something wrong? There is no baby. The words fell between them like stones. Simone stared at him, her expression uncomprehending. What? You're not pregnant. You were never pregnant. I lied about your blood test results. The silence that followed was absolute. Simone sat frozen, her hands gripping the edge of the examination table so hard her knuckles turned pale. That's not funny, she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. It's not a joke. Marco forced himself to hold her gaze, to not look away from the betrayal that was starting to dawn in her eyes. Your blood work was completely normal. There was no pregnancy. I fabricated the results. Why? The word was sharp, accusing. Why would you do something like that? Do you have any idea what the last 2 weeks have been like? The hell I've been going through? I know. And I'm sorry. But I had a reason. A good reason. What possible reason could justify lying to someone about being pregnant? Simone's voice was rising, anger replacing shock. Do you know how much this has cost me? The sleepless nights, the anxiety, the complete upheaval of my life, and you're telling me it was all a lie? Marco took a deep breath. 3 weeks ago, I received intelligence that a Russian arms dealer named Konstantin Volkov had put a hit out on you. You witnessed a meeting between Volkov and a corrupt politician in a coffee shop. You probably don't even remember it, but Volkov is paranoid. He decided you were a liability. Simone's face went from flushed with anger to white with shock. What? I've been working to neutralize the threat. But until tonight, the assassin Volkov sent was still active, still hunting you. I needed a reason to keep you monitored. To explain why you were suddenly under surveillance. A pregnancy provided that. It made you valuable enough to protect without explaining the real danger. You're insane. Simone stood up, backing away from him. You're actually insane. Arms dealers? Assassins? That's not real life. That's not possible. It's very possible. And very real. Marco pulled out his phone, bringing up photos, surveillance images of the assassin, intelligence reports on Volkov, documentation of the threat that had been hanging over Simone's head for weeks. This is why I lied. This is why I've had men watching you, protecting you, making sure you stayed safe. Simone looked at the photos, her hand trembling as she scrolled through them. Marco watched her process the information, watched the terror and disbelief war across her face. I don't understand, she whispered. How are you involved in this? You're a doctor. I'm also the head of the Vitali crime family, one of Chicago's oldest and most powerful organizations. Marco's voice was steady, matter of fact. The clinic is legitimate, but it's also useful cover for my actual work. When you walked in 2 weeks ago, I recognized you from surveillance photos my people had compiled, and I made a split-second decision to protect you the only way I knew how. By lying to me. By making me think I was pregnant. Simone's voice broke. How is that protection? Because it worked. The assassin is gone. Volkov believes you're dead complications from a pregnancy. The threat is over. You're safe. Safe? Simone laughed, a slightly hysterical sound. You're a mob boss. You've had men following me, watching me, lying to me for weeks. How is any of that safe? Because you're alive. Marco moved closer, his intensity making the small room feel smaller. Because you're standing here, angry and hurt but alive. If I hadn't intervened, if I hadn't fabricated that pregnancy, Volkov's assassin would have killed you. You'd be dead, Simone. And I wouldn't let that happen. Tears were streaming down Simone's face now, her carefully maintained composure cracking under the weight of too many revelations. I don't know what to believe. I don't know what's real anymore. This is real. Marco framed her face with his hands, his touch gentle despite his size. What I feel for you is real. The protection I've offered is real. My regret for the pain I've caused you is real. Everything, else the lies, the deception was just me trying to keep you alive long enough to tell you the truth. You don't know me, Simone whispered. How can you feel anything real for someone you don't know? I know that you're brave, that you face impossible situations with courage, that you're passionate about your work and loyal to the people you love, that you took responsibility for a pregnancy you didn't want because it was the right thing to do. I know enough, Simone. More than enough. I should hate you. But she wasn't pulling away from his touch. You lied to me, manipulated me, inserted yourself into my life without my permission. You should hate me, Marco agreed. You'd be justified, but I'm asking you not to. I'm asking you to understand that everything I did to protect you. And I'm asking you to give me a chance to prove that what's between us, this connection we both feel, is worth the complicated beginning. We don't have a connection. We can't. You're a criminal. I'm a man who fell for a woman the moment she walked into my examination room talking about The Great Gatsby and the nature of romantic foolishness. Marco's smile was sad. You said Gatsby was both a romantic and a fool. Maybe I am too. Maybe this is my romantic foolishness, believing that you could look past what I am and see who I want to be. For you. Simone's breath hitched. This is crazy. All of this is crazy. Yes, it is, but that doesn't make it less real. Marco's thumb brushed away a tear on her cheek. Stay. Let me explain everything. Let me show you that I'm more than the lies I told. And then, if you want to walk away, I'll let you go. I'll make sure you're protected forever, and I'll never contact you again. But give me one chance to prove that this us is worth fighting for. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and fear and the weight of impossible choices. Finally, Simone whispered, one chance. But if you lie to me again, if you manipulate me again, I'm gone. I don't care how dangerous your world is. I won't live in deception. No more lies, Marco promised. From this moment forward, nothing but truth. Marco took Simone to his private residence, not the mansion he used for business meetings, but the penthouse apartment that was his actual home. It was sleek, modern, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Chicago's skyline. Sit, he said, gesturing to a leather sofa. I'll make coffee, and then I'll tell you everything. Simone sat stiffly, her eyes tracking him as he moved through the open kitchen. She was still processing, still trying to reconcile the gentle doctor who'd drawn her blood with the Mafia boss who'd admitted to orchestrating an elaborate deception to save her life. When Marco returned with 2 cups of espresso, he sat across from her, maintaining distance, giving her space to process. Ask me anything, he said. I'll answer honestly. How long have you... I've been involved in organized crime? My whole life. My father ran the Vitali family before me. I was raised in this world, educated in it, trained for it. I took over 7 years ago when my father died. And the medical degree? The clinic? Real. I went to medical school because I wanted to be more than just my father's son. I wanted legitimate skills, a legitimate face. The clinic serves dual purposes. It's a genuine medical facility, but it also gives me cover and allows me to help people in my organization who can't go to regular hospitals. Do you? Simone's voice caught. Do you hurt people? Kill people? Marco met her eyes steadily. Yes, when necessary. When there's no other choice. When protecting my people or my territory requires it. I'm not going to lie to you about what I am, Simone. I've done things that would horrify you. Things I'm not proud of. But I have rules. Lines I don't cross. Innocents are off limits. Children are untouchable. And I don't cause suffering unnecessarily. But you do cause suffering. Sometimes. Yes. There was no apology in his voice, just acknowledgement. I operate in a world where violence is currency and power is everything. I'd be dead by now if I weren't willing to do what's necessary to survive and protect what's mine. Simone was quiet for a long moment, sipping her espresso, processing. When she spoke again, her voice was steadier. Why me? Why go to such lengths to protect someone you don't know? At first, it was strategic. You were an innocent bystander in danger because of our world. I have a code against that. But then, Marco set down his cup. Then you walked into my examination room, and something changed. You were nervous about needles, so you started talking about teaching and literature and passion, and I realized you were extraordinary, strong and vulnerable at the same time, brave enough to face what you thought was a life-changing situation alone. So you lied to me. So I protected you the only way I could think of. Was it manipulative? Yes. Was it wrong? Probably. But it worked. You're alive, Simone. Safe. And that matters more to me than whether my methods were ethical. What happens now? Simone asked quietly. The threat is over. Volkov thinks I'm dead. You've told me the truth. What happens to us? That depends on you. Marco leaned forward, his intensity making the air between them crackle. I want you in my life, Simone. Not as a patient, not as someone I'm protecting, as a woman I'm pursuing, as someone I'm hoping will give me a chance to prove that what I feel is real. Your world is dangerous. Yes. You've admitted to murder. Yes. You lied to me about something fundamental, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. Marco's voice was raw with emotion. But I won't regret keeping you alive. I won't regret the fact that we're sitting here having this conversation instead of me attending your funeral. Simone's breath caught at the blunt words. You really believe I would have died? I know you would have. Volkov doesn't leave loose ends. His assassin was good, Simone. Professional. Patient. If I hadn't intervened, you'd have been dead within a week of your first appointment with me. And now? Now you're under my protection permanently. Whether you choose to be part of my life or not, you're mine to protect. Always. That's non-negotiable. You can't just decide I'm yours to protect, Simone said, but there was less heat in her voice than before. I'm not property. You're right. You're not property. You're a woman who deserves to make her own choices. Marco stood, moving to stand by the windows, his silhouette backlit by the city lights. So I'm asking you to choose. Choose to give us a chance. Choose to let me prove that I can be more than the lies I told. Choose to believe that what's between us is worth the complications. Simone joined him at the windows, standing close, enough that she could feel his body heat, far enough that they weren't touching. I should say no, she said quietly. I should walk away from you and your dangerous world and never look back. You should, Marco agreed. But I can't stop thinking about you. Haven't been able to since that first appointment. And I don't think it's just because of the pregnancy lie. There was something before that. Something real. Marco turned to face her, and the want in his eyes made Simone's breath catch. There was. There is. And if you give me a chance, I'll spend every day proving it to you. I'm a high school teacher, Marco. I live in a small apartment and grade papers on Friday nights. Your world and mine don't mix. Then we'll find a way to build a new world, one where we both fit. He reached out, taking her hand, his thumb tracing patterns on her palm. I'm not asking you to become someone you're not. I'm asking you to let me into your life. To let me show you that love can exist, even in complicated circumstances. Love? Simone's voice was barely a whisper. You're talking about love? I'm talking about the possibility of it, the beginning of it, the chance to build something real between us. Marco pulled her closer, until they were breath apart. What do you say, Simone Carter? Will you give a romantic fool a chance to prove he's not completely foolish? Simone looked up at him, at this dangerous, complicated man who'd lied to save her life and was now offering her his truth. Every logical part of her brain screamed that this was insane, impossible, destined for disaster. But her heart was saying something entirely different. One chance, she whispered. But Marco, I mean it. No more lies, no more deception. If we're going to try this, it has to be built on truth. Nothing but truth, Marco promised. Then he kissed her, and Simone's world tilted on its axis. The kiss was everything their first encounter should have been: intense, demanding, full of promise and danger and want that had been building for weeks. Marco's hand slid into her hair, tilting her head to deepen the angle, and Simone melted into him, all her reservations burning away in the heat between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he said, his voice rough with desire, "Not for anything physical unless you want it. Just stay. Let me hold you. Let me prove that this is real." Simone knew she should say no, should go home, process everything that had happened, make rational decisions in the light of day. Instead, She heard herself whisper, "Okay, I'll stay." The next 3 months were the most intense and terrifying and exhilarating of Simone's life. Marco was true to his word about honesty. He told her everything about his organization, about the businesses he controlled, both legitimate and otherwise, about the delicate balance of power he maintained in Chicago's underworld. He showed her financial records that proved most of his income came from legal sources. He introduced her to the network of legitimate businesses, restaurants, medical facilities, real estate holdings that formed the public face of the Vitali empire. But he also didn't hide the darker aspects. He told her when territorial disputes arose, when rival families challenged his authority, when violence became necessary to maintain peace. He never asked her to participate or witness, but he didn't pretend those parts of his life didn't exist. "I'm meeting with the Russo family tomorrow," he told her one evening as they cooked dinner together in his penthouse. "There's been tension over some waterfront property. It needs to be addressed before it escalates." "Will it be dangerous?" Simone asked, chopping vegetables with the precision he'd taught her. "Potentially. The Russos respect strength, but they're also opportunistic. They'll test boundaries if they think they can get away with it." "And if they push too hard?" Marco's hands stilled on the pasta he was rolling. "Then I'll push back. Hard enough that they remember why challenging me is a bad idea." "You mean violence?" "I mean whatever's necessary to maintain stability. Sometimes that's negotiation. Sometimes it's economic pressure. And yes, sometimes it's violence." He met her eyes. "Does that frighten you?" Simone thought about the question honestly. 3 months ago, the answer would have been an automatic yes. But she'd spent 3 months watching Marco move through his world, seeing how his presence kept smaller conflicts from escalating, how his reputation prevented violence more often than it caused it. "It frightens me that you might get hurt," she admitted. "But I understand that your world operates by different rules than mine. I don't like it, but I understand it." Marco crossed the kitchen to pull her into his arms. "If I could change it, if I could wave a hand and make my world suddenly legitimate and safe, I would. For you, I'd walk away from all of it." "Don't," Simone said firmly. "Don't make promises like that. I fell in love with who you are, Marco. All of you. The doctor and the Mafia boss. The gentle man who makes me breakfast, and the dangerous man who protects what's his. I'm not asking you to change. I'm just asking you to be careful." "I love you," Marco said, kissing her forehead. "Have I mentioned that today?" "Only twice." "You're slipping." "Then let me rectify that immediately." "I love you, Simone Carter. I love your strength and your stubbornness and the way you correct my grammar when I'm trying to be romantic in English." "Someone has to maintain standards," Simone teased. But her heart was full. They'd fallen into a comfortable rhythm over the past 3 months. Simone kept her apartment but spent most nights at Marco's penthouse. She continued teaching, finding that her students provided a necessary anchor to normalcy in a life that had become increasingly complex. Marco had been surprisingly supportive of her work. He'd shown up to parent-teacher conferences for some of her most troubled students, using his presence to intimidate parents who'd been neglecting their children's education. He donated new computers to her school's library and funded a scholarship program for students who couldn't afford college. "You're showing off?" Simone had accused him after the scholarship announcement. "I'm investing in the community you care about," Marco had corrected. "Is that so wrong?" It wasn't wrong. It was thoughtful and generous and exactly the kind of thing that made Simone fall deeper in love with him every day. But there were challenges too. The whispers that followed Simone when she walked through her neighborhood with Marco. The way some of her colleagues looked at her when they discovered who she was dating. The occasional threat from rivals who thought she might be leverage against Marco. That last one nearly broke them. It happened 2 months into their relationship. Simone was leaving school late one Friday afternoon when a car pulled up beside her. Before she could react, 2 men had grabbed her. A cloth pressed over her face, darkness rushing in. She woke in a cold, dirty warehouse, tied to a chair, her head pounding. A man sat across from her middle-aged, expensive suit, dead eyes. "Miss Carter," he said pleasantly. "I apologize for the rough treatment. My name is Victor Kozlov. I have business with Marco Vitali, and you're going to help me get his attention." Fear clawed at Simone's throat, but she forced herself to stay calm. "He's going to kill you. You understand that, right? The moment he finds out you took me, you're dead." "Perhaps. But first, he's going to give me what I want. Territory on the South Side, 20 million in cash, and his promise to stay out of my operations for the next 5 years. Victor smiled. "You're very valuable, Miss Carter. Worth far more than you probably realize. I'm a teacher. I'm nobody. You're the woman Marco Vitale loves. That makes you everything. Simone was held for 6 hours. 6 hours of terror, of wondering if Marco would find her in time, of imagining all the ways this could go wrong. But mostly, she was angry. Angry that someone had used her to get to Marco. Angry that her ordinary life had been violated because of her connection to his extraordinary world. Angry that she'd become exactly the kind of liability she'd feared. When Marco arrived, and he did arrive, with Antonio and a dozen armed men, the relief was overwhelming. But so was the realization of what her relationship with him really meant. Victor hadn't stood a chance. Marco had negotiated his release of Simone with cold precision, then made it very clear that touching her again would result in consequences that made death seem merciful. Later, back at the penthouse, Simone sat wrapped in a blanket, hands still shaking, from the adrenaline crash. "I'm sorry," Marco said, kneeling in front of her. "I'm so sorry. This is exactly what I was trying to prevent by keeping you at a distance, by protecting you without you knowing. This is why the pregnancy lie worked, because making you publicly connected to me makes you a target." "You can't protect me from everything," Simone said quietly. "And I won't live in fear, Marco. I won't let your enemies dictate how I live my life." "Then let me increase security. Let me have men watching you all the time. Let me move you somewhere safer." "No." Simone's voice was firm. "I'm not giving up my apartment, my independence, my life. We need to find a different solution." "What solution? How do I keep you safe without restricting your freedom?" "You teach me," Simone said. "You teach me about your world, about the threats, about how to protect myself. You stop treating me like someone who needs to be sheltered and start treating me like a partner who needs to be prepared." Marco stared at her, emotions warring across his face. "You want to learn how to defend yourself. I want to be less helpless. Today I was taken because I was unprepared, because I didn't see the threat coming, because I've been living in my normal world while dating someone from a completely different reality. That needs to change. It will make you a bigger part of my world. More visible, more vulnerable in some ways, even as you become stronger in others." "I know, but I'd rather be a visible, prepared target than an invisible, helpless one." Simone reached out, taking his hand. "I love you, Marco. I'm not going anywhere. But if we're going to make this work, I need to understand your world better. I need to be able to defend myself. Can you give me that?" Marco's jaw clenched, but he nodded slowly. "Tomorrow, you start training. Self-defense, situational awareness, basic security protocols. Antonio will teach you. He's the best. Thank you. Don't thank me for putting you in danger. You didn't put me in danger. Viktor Kozlov did. And you saved me." Simone cupped his face. "Now help me make sure I can help save myself next time." The training was grueling. Antonio was a patient but demanding teacher, pushing Simone to learn how to throw a punch, break a hold, identify threats before they materialized. She learned where to sit in restaurants for maximum visibility and escape routes. She learned how to check her car for tampering. She learned the names and faces of Marco's most dangerous rivals. "You're a natural," Antonio told her after a particularly successful sparring session. "Quick reflexes, good instincts. Boss is lucky to have you." "I'm lucky to have him," Simone corrected. "Even though he makes my life infinitely more complicated. That's what love does, complicates things." Antonio's expression grew serious. "Can I give you some advice? Off the record? Please, don't try to change him. Don't try to make him leave this life. Men like Marco, we're built for this world. It's in our blood. If you try to pull him out completely, you'll lose him. But if you can accept him as he is while being the light that keeps him human, that's how you make this work." Simone thought about that conversation a lot over the following weeks. She wasn't trying to change Marco, but she was trying to influence him toward better choices, toward using his power and resources for good whenever possible. The clinic expansion was her idea. "You have this medical degree you barely use except as cover," she'd said one evening. "What if you actually used it to help people? What if we turned one of your clinics into a genuine community resource?" Marco had been skeptical at first, but Simone's enthusiasm was infectious. Within weeks, they developed a plan to expand the Chicago Medical Center into a full-service facility offering free or low-cost care to underserved populations. Simone threw herself into the project, using her organizational skills and teaching experience to develop educational programs. Marco provided funding and used his connections to recruit talented doctors who believed in the mission. They became partners in the truest sense, building something good together, using Marco's resources and Simone's passion to create real change in their community. "You're making me better," Marco told her one night as they reviewed plans for the clinic expansion. "Making me want to be better. You were always good, Marco. You just needed someone to remind you that power can be used for more than survival and territory." He'd kissed her then, and the kiss had led to more, and Simone had marveled at how completely her life had changed in 6 months. From a teacher who'd thought she was pregnant with her ex's baby to a woman who was building a life with Chicago's most powerful and dangerous man. It shouldn't have worked. By any logical standard, their relationship was doomed. But logic had nothing to do with what they'd built together, a love born from lies that had become more honest than anything either of them had experienced before. They were in Marco's penthouse one evening, cooking dinner together, when Simone finally asked the question that had been haunting her. "Do you regret it? The pregnancy lie?" Marco stopped chopping vegetables, his hands stilling on the knife. "I regret the pain it caused you, the fear, the anxiety, the upheaval of your life. But I don't regret the outcome. You're alive. We're together. That matters more than the means we used to get here." It was manipulative. Yes. It was also necessary. Marco set down the knife and turned to face her. "Simone, if I could go back and find another way, I would. But I can't. And I won't pretend that I wish I'd made a different choice when that choice is the reason you're standing here with me now. What if I'd never found out? What if you'd let me keep believing I was pregnant? I wouldn't have. Once the threat was neutralized, I planned to tell you the truth immediately. I never intended for the lie to be permanent. But you would have let it go on for weeks. Months, maybe. However long it took to keep me safe." "Yes." Marco's jaw tightened. "I would have let you hate me. Let you think the worst of me, if it meant keeping you alive. I'm not going to apologize for that, Simone. Keeping you safe was and always will be my first priority." Simone was quiet for a moment, processing. Then she said quietly, "I understand why you did it. Logically, I understand. But emotionally, it's hard. Knowing that our relationship started with a lie. Knowing that you were capable of manipulating me so completely." Marco moved closer, framing her face with his hands. "I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life proving that what we have now is real. That I value your trust more than anything. That I'll never deceive you again. Promise me," Simone whispered. "Promise me that if there's ever danger, if there's ever a threat, you'll tell me instead of trying to protect me with lies. I promise. No more deception. Only truth, even when it's difficult." Marco kissed her forehead. "You have my word, Simone. And my word is the one thing I never break." That night, for the first time, Simone let Marco take her to bed. Not out of obligation or expectation, but because she wanted him with an intensity that made her breath catch. Because 3 months of building trust and navigating complications had led to this moment, and she was finally ready to take that step. Marco was gentle, reverent, treating her body like something precious. He took his time, learning what made her gasp, what made her arch into his touch, what made her cry out his name in a language that transcended words. Afterward, lying in his arms, Simone felt something settle in her chest, a sense of rightness, of belonging, that she'd never experienced before. "I love you," Marco said quietly, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. "I've loved you since you walked into my examination room talking about romantic fools. I love your strength, your passion, your courage in facing impossible situations. I love you, Simone Carter. Completely. Irrevocably." Simone's breath caught. She'd known, of course. Had felt it in the way he looked at her, touched her, protected her. But hearing the words made it real, in a way nothing else had. "I love you too," she whispered back. "Despite everything. Because of everything. I love you, Marco Vitali." 6 months after the pregnancy lie, Marco took Simone to Italy. They spent 2 weeks in Tuscany, staying in a villa that had been in Marco's family for generations. He showed her his father's homeland, taught her to make pasta from scratch, introduced her to relatives who welcomed her with open arms and knowing smiles. It was the happiest Simone had ever been. Far from Chicago, far from the complications of Marco's work, they could just be 2 people in love, building a future together. On their last night, Marco took her to a small restaurant overlooking rolling hills covered in vineyards. They ate slowly, lingering over wine and conversation, watching the sun set in shades of gold and crimson. "Simone," Marco said as dessert arrived, "I need to ask you something." That sounds ominous, she teased, but her heart started racing when she saw the intensity in his pale gray eyes. It's not ominous. It's terrifying. Marco reached across the table, taking her hand. I'm not good at pretty speeches. I'm not romantic in the traditional sense. I'm a man who operates in a world of violence and power and compromises that most people would find unconscionable. Marco. But you make me want to be better. You make me believe that maybe there's more to life than power and control. You make me think that love is worth any risk, any cost, any complication. He stood, moving around the table to kneel beside her. Chair. And Simone's breath stopped completely. Marry me, Simone. Let me spend the rest of my life proving that what started with lies became the most honest thing I've ever known. Let me protect you and cherish you and love you until my last breath. He pulled out a ring, a stunning emerald surrounded by diamonds. Set in platinum. It was dramatic, unique, perfectly suited to her. Say yes, Marco said quietly. Please say yes. Simone looked at him, this dangerous, complicated man who'd lied to save her life and told the truth to win her heart. This man who'd shown her what it meant to be loved completely, protected fiercely, cherished absolutely. She thought about the pregnancy that had never existed, the lie that had brought them together. She thought about everything they'd built since the trust, the honesty, the love that had grown from impossible circumstances. Yes, she whispered. Yes, I'll marry you. Marco slid the ring onto her finger and kissed her with a passion that made the other restaurant patrons applaud. When they finally broke apart, both laughing and crying, Simone felt complete in a way she'd never imagined possible. I love you, she said. My romantic fool. And I love you, Marco replied. My beautiful, brave Simone. Forever and always. Simone Vitali stood in the clinic that Marco had expanded and legitimized, no longer a cover for his other operations, but a genuine community medical center serving Chicago's underserved populations. She'd insisted on it after they got married. If Marco was going to continue operating in the gray areas between legitimate and criminal, she wanted something unambiguously good to balance it out. The clinic was a place where anyone could get medical care, regardless of their ability to pay, where Marco's medical degree was used to help rather than deceive. Mrs. Vitali? A nurse appeared in the doorway of Simone's office. Yes, she had an office now, running the clinic's educational programs and community outreach. Your 2:00 appointment is here. Simone smiled and stood, smoothing her dress over the small but visible bump of her pregnancy. This pregnancy was real, and very much wanted. When she'd taken the test 3 months ago, she'd laughed until she cried, appreciating the cosmic irony. Marco had found her in the bathroom, had seen the positive test, and had gone very still. Is this real? Simone had assured him, wrapping her arms around his neck. Very, very real. We're going to have a baby, Marco. The joy on his face had been worth everything they'd been through to get to that moment. Now, as she moved through her day at the clinic, stopping to talk with patients and review educational materials, Simone reflected on how far they'd come. Marco had gradually shifted more of his operations to legitimate businesses, using his power and influence to build something that would make their child proud. He was still dangerous. Still, operated in a world that Simone preferred not to think about too closely. But he was also a man who came home to her every night, who talked about their future with a certainty that made her feel safe, who loved her with an intensity that still took her breath away. That evening, lying in bed with Marco's hand resting protectively over her stomach, Simone thought about the pregnancy lie that had started it all. Do you ever think about it? She asked quietly. About how we began? Every day, Marco admitted. And every day, I'm grateful for it. Grateful that I was there when you needed protection. Grateful that you gave me a chance despite everything. Grateful that a lie born of desperation led to the most honest love I've ever known. It was an insane way to start a relationship. Yes, but would you change it? If you could go back, knowing what you know now, would you change anything? Simone thought about it seriously. About the fear and confusion and anger of those first weeks. About the danger she'd been in without knowing it. About the complicated, impossible path that had led them here. No, she said finally, I wouldn't change anything. Because all of it, the lies, the truth, the danger, the love, it made us who we are. Together. Marco kissed her, deep and claiming, his hand protective over their child. Together, he agreed, forever. And as Simone drifted off to sleep in the arms of the man who'd lied to save her life and told the truth to win her heart, she thought about fate and chance and the strange paths that lead us to where we're meant to be. Sometimes the biggest lies reveal the deepest truths. Sometimes the most dangerous beginning leads to the safest love. And sometimes the person who deceives you is the only one who sees you clearly enough to know exactly what you need.